Well, welcome to the Craft and Character Podcast. Steve Carter here, and in association with my good friends at Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry, I bring you a podcast that hopefully helps you get better at the craft of teaching and preaching while always hoping and ensuring our character leads the way. Well, today I am really, really excited because I get to bring back a friend who many of you emailed me. You have just told me when you saw me how much the interview with Steve Cuss on managing leadership anxiety was helpful for you in your role as a preacher and teacher and pastor. And Steve has a new book out called The Expectation Gap. Steve's just an incredible guy. I mean, he leads Capable Life. He's got these journals that are just fantastic. He has an incredible podcast on the Christianity Today network. He's just the real deal. And I think that this book is one of those books that is for everyone, but I think there's some writing because he is a former pastor. I mean, he still is a pastor, but he was at a church outside Denver for many years. But I feel like this book just hits on themes that pastors uniquely have to wrestle down to the ground. So without further ado, the one, the only, my Aussie friend, Steve Cuss. Welcome to the Craft and Character Podcast.
Great to be with you, Steve, whether it's on a pod or just hanging out or texting.
Yes.
Always a good time, man.
Oh man. Well, let's just jump right in. I'm curious why this book, The Expectation Gap. Like, where did this idea come from? Because as I started to read it, I was like, oh man, like I never would have thought of these assumptions as expectations. I would never been able to name these gaps, but as I just got into it, I was like, man, this is just speaking to so much of me right now. I'm just curious, what led you to this one?
Yeah, I mean, a lot like my first book, Managing Leadership Anxiety, it really was born out of my own personal struggle. In some ways, it feels unfair that straight out of a conservative Bible college, my first job was as a trauma chaplain in an urban hospital. But it really has been a gift that keeps giving to me. But what that year did when I was 24 was put me in a major deconstruction. Just being surrounded by that much death and tragedy. I kept asking in some form or fashion, what is God good for? I don't mean by that God owes us anything. I just want to get clear. What can I count on? There's promises in the Bible. Is that it's not that the Bible isn't true. I've just learned to mistrust my bias when I read it. So that's where it began for me. And then as a lead pastor, I kept finding that I was sneaking into a deism that was profoundly unsatisfying. It's wow, I am proclaiming a love of God that I'm struggling to believe for myself. I absolutely believe it for you. I don't believe it for myself. There's some twisted, sick humility in that's not actually true. So God's love, and then I started to notice, wow, I proclaim freedom in Christ and I'm not free. I am wrapped up in criticism and people-pleasing. And so for me, the turning point was 2016. I remember, I know you've had these same experiences. You kind of have this mark in the road, and I just remember thinking in 2016, I'd been a lead pastor by then for 11 years. I'd been in ministry for 22 years. I just remember thinking, I can't do another 5 like this. Something has to be different. And so I just decided to go on a hunt for the gospel I believed in my head, but my body was betraying. And it really was profound. And I still struggle with gaps, but it's night and day from what it was for me, for sure.
Steve, quick question. How old were you 8 years ago?
I have to do the math because I'm a pastor. I was 44.
You're 44. So kind of in the second half of life, move and shift, you're kind of saying, hey, first half of life is not going to be able to transfer over into second half of life, leading, pastoring, shepherding. I think so many leaders go through that. They find themselves in that kind of place to go, man, some of those assumptions that I made, some of those ways at which, illusions that maybe I had like just not wanted anybody to see. But I love the way that you talked about it. It's almost like you were longing for a deeper integration from in your heart, mind, and body of what you actually believed in your head. And I love that.
Yeah, even outside of what I'm writing about in the book, I just think so many of us as pastors, we feel a pressure to disciple people, even that language.
Yeah.
It's actually God. I mean, I don't mean to be corny here, but God's a discipler. So there's even times where I was like, man, if I took my foot off the discipleship gas, would people grow? Am I actually just keeping everyone busy, as opposed to actual growth? And so some of those deeper questions. And for me, it has to, what I believe in God and the goodness of God has to count in the death room for it to count. Like I definitely had that like litmus test in my life. Like if I can look someone in the eye who has cancer or someone as they're dying and it's true, then it's always going to be true.
Wow.
Trying to boil down some of it for me was a big deal.
There's a phrase in your subtitle, and I think it's the second chapter as well, titled "Relaxing into God's Presence."
Yeah.
And I mean, I think about the truth of what you just said. If I can say this to someone on their deathbed, it's going to hold a sense of weightiness. Talk about the relaxing into God's presence, because I think that phrase, when you just said it, or when I read it, I just remember just going, "Oh, that was like a felt need that I didn't even know." I just it's a longing I have. Just and sometimes you have those phrases like nothing to prove and nothing to lose and nothing to hide. You have these phrases that you're like, oh, I just want to exhale and have that be true.
Yeah.
Talk about that relaxing into God's presence and what prevents us from that.
Oh man, what a great question. Yeah, I mean, my whole ministry is helping people be human-sized. And I know that sounds weird, but most leaders that I work with, and most of my work is with faith leaders, we feel so much pressure to be superhuman. Most people carry anxiety because they are carrying more than God has asked them to carry. And anytime you're carrying more than God's asked you to carry, you're going to be anxious.
Right.
So, you look at 1 John 3:19 and 20, and John says, this is how we know we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in God's presence. That's the phrase that I just turned into relaxing into God's. How do we set our hearts at rest in God's presence? Even when our hearts condemn us, John says, God is greater than our hearts and he knows everything. And so I think what happens is when we feel any form of vulnerability, we either overcompensate or undercompensate. We either get bigger than human or smaller than human. Most type A leaders I work with, Steve, get bigger than human. You and I have worked with these people. I'm prone this way. We dominate. We kind of control the meeting. We have to have the last word. We have to be the smartest guy in the room. And we think that's good leadership, but it's just anxiety. We're so anxious that we can't be human. We can't be curious. So that's a form of self-righteousness when you get bigger. And then when you get smaller than human, you're in self-protection. You no longer feel safe to be exactly yourself. And we've all been in that room as well. Yeah. You walk into the room, someone says something or does something, and your safety radar says you cannot be exactly yourself. You have to now either protect yourself or give a pretense. So whether you're self-righteous or self-protecting, it's self. And you're depending on self to be well. And it's impossible to relax into God's presence when you're depending on self to be righteous, so that's kind of the theological version of it. But I train people how to notice when they've gotten bigger and smaller than human size. It's tricky to do, but if you can notice it, then you can pause and actually relax into the Lord. I'm just trying to feel God's love in my chest, and I'm trying to feel it 8 to 15 times a day. That's my current quest. And some days I don't do it at all, but most days I'm now in a context where I'm stubbing my toe in the love of God a number of times a day.
Wow. You have a little bit of a scheduling way that you go about this. I know you just said the 8 to 15, but you had a little like formula that you challenge pastors on being human. Talk about that.
Which one is it? I've got a few. Which one?
Okay. Well, I think it was how many minutes a day can you be
Yep.
fully you and not have the pastor hat on? Is that
Yep.
the best way to describe it?
Yeah. How many minutes a week can you be exactly yourself? And then that question is not designed for you to get out a stopwatch, because it's a hard.
Yeah.
It's designed to provoke us to recognize that pastors, like, we've probably all done marriage counseling in the grocery aisle. I know I have. Like, my wife and I have had the conversation, and we're not at a particularly big church, but we've had the conversation. Maybe she should go in because we don't have enough time for me to go in,
Yeah.
because my pastor hat is on almost all the time. And then the other complication that I think we're just now getting the hang of as pastors is we always have several hats on with our people. And that doesn't make us feel sorry for ourselves, because it's hard for our people as well. When I'm knocking on Peter's door at night, he doesn't know which hat I'm wearing. Is it the friend hat, the pastor hat, the fundraiser guy?
Yeah.
But I do think, heavy other hats that, to kind of butcher Shakespeare there. The second question is, how many people in your life can you be exactly yourself around? I think that's the question for pastors.
Yeah.
Because I think we need more single hat relationships. And so if the pastor hat is on, that's never a single hat relationship. So I work with a lot of pastors to try to, how can I take that hat off? And that pastoral hat, Steve, infects your capacity to relax into God's presence, because it's really hard to be God's employee and child.
Yes.
So there's a lot there.
It's interesting too, like just in the way that you just talked about, like family terms, because I think even for many pastors, it's hard for them to turn that off even when they're home.
Yeah.
And it's like they're leading board meetings, they're leading vision, they say it, stuff happens, and then they get home and it's not that way. And it's like, okay, we and so, I mean, I had to learn, like, oh, my kids don't care. My kids don't, my wife doesn't care. Like, she cares about me, but that's what she wants. Is that real? But it's sometimes even hard just to, from the drive home from the church, to have enough time to really decompress your day or take off that hat and actually transition into, oh yeah, I'm a dad. And I find that, like, the same piece, to your point, to my relationship with God. Like, it's easy for me to kind of keep that hat on, but like you said, it's hard to relax into God's presence.
Yeah.
How have you gotten yourself, whenever you've been in those kind of cycles, because to get yourself just to come back to not big-hearted or more focused on self, but how do you find yourself getting back to that place?
There are some particular things any pastor can do, I think. The first one is, if you go back to your calling, why did you get into this? Now, one of many, like, I love to tell people about Jesus, that of course, but one of them is I love theology. So let's just take that. I love studying theology. I couldn't believe I got to go to college, and actually at a college level and then at a master's level, I got to study theology. That was amazing to me. Okay, over time, I don't study theology for myself anymore. Like, it just started slipping. I always had an eye on the pulpit. And so Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, he says, be careful that you're not more generous than God. Like, he's talking to preachers.
Wow.
Don't be more generous than God. It's a really provocative statement. He says, the problem with preachers or humans is we're all canals. Everything that comes in goes out. He said, God's a reservoir. He's always loving out of the overflow. So one simple thing I started doing, and this was hard for me, is I started having times each week where I read theology just for myself, just for my own enjoyment. I made the pledge, no matter how great the insight, I'm not sharing it in the pulpit. And that was hard because we carry so much pressure to have something fresh every week. So that's one thing. I think pastors don't realize how much we shop at Costco, by which I mean everything in our life is in bulk. So, like, if you and I chatted right now and we listed everyone we've known in the last 2 years with cancer, it's a long list. Most humans only know a handful in their lifetime, but in our lifetime, I mean, it could be even hundreds.
Yep.
Back in May, Glenn Packiam published his schedule on Twitter, just his one day. He's like, here's what I did today. And I read it and I was like, yep, that's a pastor. He had attended a death and then he had to balance the budget for a board meeting. And just so I think there are a lot of dynamics that keep a pastor off being human-sized. And just if we realize those dynamics, and then we can simply say, okay, when's the last time I've enjoyed God's gifts for me and I'm not always having an eye on who I can give them to? I think we believe we're being selfless and we're actually just avoiding when we're so others focused.
Wow. I really love that because you're tapping into how you are wired, and I remember when I first moved to Chicago, I had learned of all of the neighborhoods in Chicago, but I had never been. I'd been to a handful of them, but not to all of them. And so I got a map of Chicago, and part of what I love to do is explore. I love adventure.
Yeah.
And that's what I just did for my Sabbath I would explore a coffee shop. Was there a record store? Was there like a thrift store, old like furniture spot? Like what was that neighborhood known for? The architecture. And that's what I would go delight in. And it just like, it was something that was unique to me and it how God wired me, but it was so life-giving that I could almost rest in that reservoir instead of producing something for somebody else. I could just like experience the uniqueness of God and the presence of God in this neighborhood of Andersonville that's different from Logan Square, that kind of piece, which was so fun for me. But I also love that the way that you're talking about this, because I think, when you go through a day like Glenn put on Twitter, and I feel like I've had one of those days from, podcast to employee handbook to budget conversation, the very similar and uniqueness. I think that you can constantly just run from one meeting to the next, to the next, to the next. When you talked about having 8 to 15, feel the love of God in your chest, when you've had days of just back to back, how do you do that? Because I think it's something that pastors want, but they're not always sure how to do it.
Well, yeah. So yes, what anxiety does is it says it's all on you. And so the tendency, if you start mistrusting anxiety, that's kind of step one. And then you start to realize, oh, it's actually selling me a gospel.
Wow.
Which I mean, it's putting me on a path that leads to a promise. Every gospel has a path, a promise. And I'm sorry, Steve, for the alliteration. You're a preaching maestro. And here I am dragging you back into the 1990s with preaching alliteration. But
it's memorable. It's memorable.
Yeah. A path, a promise, and a payment. But anxiety's gospel always makes you pay. That's how you know it's false, because the Christian gospel, the God always pays and the human benefits.
Ooh.
But anxiety's gospel and the Roman Empire's gospel, the Pax Romana, and actually every other gospel ever, the human pays and the God benefits. Go back to Egypt in the days of Moses, the human sacrificing, the God gets the benefit. Well, if you just start to see that anxiety is like a force, it's like a God-like force, and it's always making you pay. It's saying, worry your way to peace. It's saying, just try harder, just do more of the same. So anxiety's got you on a treadmill to nowhere, and you are running harder and harder. So the moment you can notice you've stopped noticing the Lord, that's where I start. Wow. If I can notice that I've stopped noticing the Lord, then I can get off the treadmill. Now, relaxing into God's presence takes 30 seconds to 2 minutes, most exercises. And I love what you just said about the architecture. Human beings were imprinted with God's image. And one of the many benefits of that is we are moved by beauty. And so you just gave us that example. Like you are moved by the beauty of Chicago architecture and also the wonder of something new and exploration. So we have beauty and wonder, 2 core attributes of being Imago Dei. You can just make a few more. Love, obviously, is Imago Dei. Every time I eat, I try to remember I'm not an animal. I don't have to eat to survive. I eat to connect and for pleasure.
Wow.
Right? Like, so I just had a lunch with one of my best friends right before this podcast. And as I'm eating, I'm looking at my friend Kevin and I'm just giving thanks to God. Lord, thank you for Kevin. I needed Kevin today. Today happened to be a day where he reached out to me and I was in need of his encouragement. But also thank you for this food. Like I don't eat just to survive. So you start realizing that you and I have hundreds and hundreds of opportunities to remember the Lord. So for you at Chicago, last week we had a family of 5 owls move in next door.
No way.
Yeah, and it's mom and dad and 3 kids, and I spend an insane amount of time staring at those guys, like they're ready to call. I'm stalking,
Yeah.
but I'm moved by wildlife. I just seeing any wildlife is an act of worship for me, and so I make sure to never get tired of the owls. So I've looked at them 4 times today, probably 8 times yesterday. And every time I do, I'm just that little, Lord, you created me as a human to enjoy your gifts. Not many people get to enjoy owls as neighbors. Thank you. And, in your case, not many people get to enjoy the absolute iconic architecture of Chicago. Like some people fly in from all around the world to take that little river cruise to do what you get to do.
Yep.
So I'm intentionally flooding with gratitude, and then love just chases gratitude right into my heart.
Wow. I was talking with Diane Langberg recently, and I asked her, hey, how is a trauma therapist that you hold all of these stories of abuse? How do you stay sane and human? And she says, you have to deliberately chase beauty at all costs.
Yep.
And just to your point, like what you just said, and I think that is, man, and there's so much around us. And I think God is a God of props, whether it's through owls or architecture, just to see it and just to bring it in. I carry these like little brown crosses in my pocket, and it's just been like one of those ways for me, like when I put my hand in my pocket, like, oh yes, like don't forget this. And I think the way that you said that with the path, the promise, the payment, and I have to like remember, oh yeah, no, this was God's payment, not my payment. And I think that's one of the ways and reasons I do that is just to be reminded, because I'm so good at going, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to solve it. I'm going to do it. But like you said, it's a treadmill to nowhere, I'm curious, you talk about 3 gaps: God's particular love, God's gap 2, God's visceral presence, and then gap 3, the personal spiritual progress. Would you mind just maybe walking through those gaps? And I know we've kind of danced around it so far, but just talk through those, because the more that I read it, I just kept thinking, man, this hits to me in powerful ways, but I also am like, to so many of the pastors that I have conversations with, I'm like, this is so important for the soul of the pastor. So talk about that.
Yeah, I would love to talk about it. So the first gap, God's love, the chief competitor is the story we tell ourselves. And what's tricky with pastors is we syncretize our anxiety and our faith, and we don't realize. So I believe, when I look at my core belief, what anxiety is telling me, I believe that my job is to make anyone who's in front of me feel better. You can imagine, Steve, I didn't know I believed that. You can imagine what it was like for a young green chaplain walking into rooms of grief, believing that my job from God was to make that person feel better. And then, of course, failing again and again, because grief is a tornado, and my little effort to make you feel better was like, I just popped a little umbrella up. Hey, here's a little bit of Philippians, crazy.
Yeah.
That's still a default belief of mine. I can tell you now, and even as I said, I'm like, that's crazy. But then you watch me in real time with somebody who's upset, and it takes work for me to connect to them because I'm so busy trying to relieve them. Now, the problem is that sounds a lot like the gospel to me. Like Jesus said, go into all the world and love your neighbor. And so the reason we struggle to relax into God's love is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. The easiest way to discover it is your inner critic. So we dive deep into your inner critic. You do, unfortunately, have to rummage around in your childhood, because that's when a lot of these false beliefs were first formed. So I do give us a path on how do I rummage around. And then, most poignantly, if trauma is a big piece of your story, the problem with trauma is it's creating a true and false story at the same time. So it's very tricky. But fundamentally, we won't experience God's love as long as we're putting more faith in the story we tell ourselves than we are in God. The second gap's the one we've actually talked about the most, God's presence. It's our reactivity that gets in the way.
Hmm.
We disconnect when we get reactive and we get bigger or smaller than human. So when we're bigger than human, it's like I kind of picture it as that insulation you put in the wall. Like in the can, it's compacted, but it expands 200 times in the wall. When
Yeah.
we get bigger, when we're filled with reactivity, it's like we're taking up all the space where we're aware of God, and it just blocks awareness. When we get smaller, God's no longer our refuge. We are now our refuge. Um, and so you and I've chatted about it before, but we struggle to notice the Lord when we are trying to get our false needs met.
Yeah.
So as a pastor, for me, like there's four core false needs of every human. Three of mine are knowing the answer. So if I'm in a room, I need you to know that I know the answer. It's so hard for me being there for others when they're hurting, and then people pleasing, approval. So those three are a gospel, and they send me far, far away from God as I chase these false needs. And talk about a path and promise. They never deliver on their promise. They always say, if you make this person happy, that's how you'll have peace. When I was a lead pastor, we had at our zenith as a church, we had 36 staff, and I enjoyed 33 of them. Let's say that. Not to make my former staff paranoid, but several times some of them wouldn't enjoy each other. I got along with almost all my staff almost all the time, but many of them bumped each other. It was crazy, Steve, how anxiously I would make them get along so I could be okay.
Wow.
It just triggered me if they were in conflict, and I'd anxiously go in and kind of make a false peace. Well, that's the gospel of anxiety, and God's nowhere to be found. The third gap, it's the way we have shrunk scripture down to a teaching point, and we've forgotten that the people in the Bible are human, and we stack all of these once in a history people in the Bible. We expect ourselves and our people to always be all of them. So if we look at like Peter walking on water, Peter walked on water one time in his life. But if you ask the average follower of Christ, there is never a week that goes by where we don't feel like we should be stepping out in faith. Like Peter did it once. Now I understand Peter was bold his whole life, right? Like that's fair. But he only walked on water once, but we feel a low-grade pressure to always walk on water. We also ignore the other 11 that stayed in the boat. So 92% of the disciples didn't walk on water, and yet they all worshipped at the end of the story. So actually an exegetically accurate sermon would be, hey, everyone, 92% of us should stay in the boat today. 8% should walk on water. Let's watch our friend almost drown. And we're going to end up worshiping anyway because actually that story, we've turned it into Peter walking on water, and we've turned it into walking by faith, but Jesus doesn't call it. That story is about the sovereignty of Jesus over creation.
Yeah.
We're the ones that called it a walking by faith sermon. Jesus didn't even call Peter to come. Peter's the one that said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. The only thing Matthew records is Jesus says, come. That's all we have. Was Jesus saying, come, Peter, so for 2,000 years we can use you as an example? Or was Jesus saying, you know what, something fun always happens when Peter gets impetuous? Come. We don't know. And so then the next week we come back to church, and the passage is Mary and Martha. And this week we say, aren't we all too busy? We're on social media too much. We should be sitting and soaking like Mary. Okay, so one week we have to be like Peter. One week we have to be like Mary. Peter and Mary are nothing like each other, and yet we have to always be both of them. And so the reason we think we should be further along is we are chasing a carrot out of reach that none of us will ever be. None of the disciples ever were, and Jesus doesn't expect us to be. Imagine someone saying, okay, Steve, you need to be Winston Churchill, Mother Teresa, and Abraham Lincoln, and a supermodel. And you're like, listen, man, I have been moisturizing my face and using serums for over a year now, but I am still not at any risk of becoming. I can try as hard as I want. I'm not going to become a supermodel. I don't have the cheekbones for it. I don't have the dimples. I don't know how to turn left and right like Zoolander taught us. But we use the Bible. We strip these people of their humanity. We turn them into a two-dimensional example, and then we stack them on top of each other.
Yeah.
And we expect to be always all of them. So I think as long as we do that, we're doomed to guilt and shame.
What's interesting is in each of these three gaps, it requires discernment to know. And talk about that, because you talk about this caretaker part, in a sense that could show itself and make itself present, and that feels like a really important pastoral piece. And yet it's something is being activated that is actually dysregulating your ability to relax in the presence of God, and you're trying to prove something. How do you notice and discern in actual real time?
Yeah. Great question. The short answer is, for pastors particularly, we all have these spiritual gifts. One of mine is shepherding. I'm good at caring for people. I know how to enter into people's pain. When I'm human-sized, I can do that all day long, and it doesn't tax me. I mean, I may be worn out from the day, but it doesn't make me anxious. But the extreme version of our gifts is where you can find your anxiety. So people pleasing and caring for others get mixed. I need you to know that I know. Well, if you ratchet that back, I'm a gifted researcher and assimilator of information for the sake of a sermon. That's a gift. Over time, every one of us can learn between when we are serving out of our spirit-led self and when we are grasping for something we'll never get. It is hard to do, but over time, have you ever heard that story about the Eskimos that want to catch a wolf, and so they stick a buoy? I don't know if that story is true or not. It's hard to tell.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's an awesome story,
People who don't know it, just briefly, the story is the Inuit people take a Bowie knife, they dip it in deer blood, they freeze the blood onto the blade. They do that process over and over until there's a blood popsicle on this Bowie knife. They stick it, the handle in the snow, the blood popsicle is sticking out of the snow, and then they come the next day, there's a dead wolf laying next to it. And the story goes that the wolf smells the blood, starts licking it, then their tongue gets numb from the cold frozen blood, and they cannot discern anymore between when the blade slices their tongue. It's a very graphic story, I should have warned people, and when they're consuming themselves versus the deer blood. I don't know if that's a true story. It's very much a preacher story. What I like about it is that's the way anxiety works. We all have to learn, am I operating out of my spirit-led self, or am I actually on a path to death? My anxiety is dragging me down. The conviction for me was I like to be there for people when they're hurting, and I'm good at it. And I remember one day God coming to me. I come from a cognitive faith tradition, so I don't tend to say much like God said this to me, but I really felt like God was telling me, Steve, and God said, Steve, how many people can you be there for? And I immediately said, always room for more. Whatever the number is, there's always room for more. And that would explain why I overcommit. I sacrifice sermon preparation if someone has a need. I like to make, you start to see all my behavior patterns that are costing me and my loved ones. And then you're like, oh, that's why they call it a Messiah complex. So then I'm trying to ratchet back, well, what's a human-sized equivalent? So this process of discernment takes a while. This is why you normally have to do it in community, because your loved ones can see it.
Yeah.
And then you have to believe that they're there to help you with it.
I think it's really beautiful because, some of I remember listening to the stand-up comedian who talked about his maturation as a comic. He said when he first began, he was just trying to get the audience to laugh. And he knew he did a good job if the audience laughed. And then as he matured, he realized this is funny, and I have a gift that I want to give to the audience. And it was just a different like motive. I don't need them to laugh. I want to give this gift. And I think it's very fascinating for me to kind of tap into when my discernment process is, okay, what's the end goal? Am I needing them to think I'm the smartest person in the room? Am I needing them to think I'm a healthy shepherd? Am I needing them to think I'm an incredible communicator? Or is this, I get to bring, my full kind of heart, mind, body, soul to this moment as a gift to hopefully help them experience the presence of Christ and help them relax into God's presence, not necessarily into, Steve Cuss is amazing. Steve Carter is amazing.
Yeah.
And that's been one of those ways. But I think you're so right. The importance of having community, but also I would say having a coach. And you do this with Capable Life. Talk about that, because I think that's a really beautiful way that you've come alongside staff teams at churches, CEOs, pastors, leaders in nonprofit spaces. Yeah. Why have a coach?
Oh gosh. Others can see, a good coach can see something in you in the first 3 minutes. That's the gift of anxiety. It is like a poker game. We all have tells, and we don't even know we have tells in everyone around us. By the time your kids are 10, they can tell you when you're anxious, when you don't know you're anxious.
Wow.
Yeah. And so a good coach, the coaches that I've trained that work with our field, we teach them, how do you listen for an assumption in someone else? Because as I was listening to you, Steve, it's true. We feel so much pressure to perform. Some of that is healthy and some is unhealthy. We also feel pressure that God is telling us to do something. So a lot of my coaching and my coaches help people detangle God from anxiety. And that's really, I think, where freedom is it's not just people pleasing. Like pastors get a bad rap. Oh, you're all about the stage and stuff. Most pastors I work with are actually really trying to honor God. They really want to honor God. But even in that beautiful effort, they're just carrying more than God ever asked them to carry. Mm. And so what we do in Capable Life is we just slowly, over the course of months, help them detangle their anxiety from their beliefs. We help them realize that their belief in Jesus is actually not their deepest belief. It's their most precious belief. And then we help them gently rummage around in their deepest beliefs that are infecting their capacity to enjoy the God they serve. I mean, that would be it in a nutshell. We use a specific training called systems theory, which is a training that teaches you to notice the impact of anxiety. And what's fascinating about it is, particularly when I work with leaders that are more type A, driven, entrepreneurial, visionary, then most commonly what happens, Steve, is because they're the one that generates the anxiety and they don't carry it, they don't think they're anxious. Mm. But I'll make a generalization here. Your classic entrepreneurial, driven, visionary preaching leader generates anxiety in others, and the others carry it. So 3 questions that any leader can ask. Number 1, who's generating most of the anxiety in the room? Number 2, who's carrying it? And then where it gets really powerful, what micro adjustments are they all making to keep everything the way it is?
Wow.
So like if we go back and read, breathe, and receive, and just focus on your time at Willow, we could ask those 3 questions about the system at Willow. Now, what's interesting is everybody loves a scapegoat. We do get a perverse pleasure when someone falls, because now we can kind of demonize them. And I believe they should be exposed. They should be held accountable. I believe leaders do more damage than other people because of power dynamics. But in our tools, we never blame. We're always looking at everyone's contribution. And so oftentimes the reason an anxious leader is allowed to get away with their behavior is the secret agreement of all the people around them. No one knew how to say, we don't do that here. Yeah. We don't tolerate that here.
Yeah. That like reminds me of this moment. And I think this is fascinating because for every pastor, and especially if you've been at a place for a while, you've had different iterations of new staff coming in, and somebody else has told them kind of the oral culture and tradition of like what works, and kind of that inside baseball of how we do things here and what are the most important values. But it all gets like translated differently. It's almost like the game telephone, right? And I remember it was one service, and one of the lights on the stage at Willow broke, and it actually shattered during the service. Like, it got too hot and shattered. So it's in between the 9 and 11:15, and nobody's being let in because they got to fix the light, because excellence is the highest value. So I'm like, why is nobody in the building? Well, because it's been told to us about this. So I actually walked back to Bill and I was like, hey, Bill, this is what's going on. Did you say this? He's like, I never said that. So I had to like call in the team to say, hey, tell them why you made this decision, and really talk about the lies and agreements that we've made based on an interpretation of a perception of reality. And again, it's like, it was fascinating, and it was such a good like redeeming moment in that for those all the parties and ministries, because it's wild that, and so easy for that to happen. And I love just how you talk about anxiety. I love how you really, like, I mean, I'll never forget this moment, just us talking, and you said, what's anxiety is when I get a text and someone asks me to go for a walk from the congregation. And I was like, oh, wow. Yes. And it's like, you've helped me be so aware of, gosh, like, I've put that on God, but that's actually my anxiety. Or I've put that on myself, and that's actually my anxiety. And it's causing me, or giving me more permission to run at a pace that's not possible for the long term or sustainable. I feel like the way that you do that, and what I so appreciate about this book, and I don't want to give it away, but I'm sort of going to, is the last chapter is called Home and Shalom. And I really loved it. I loved, just like, it was almost like this return home, but like to the peace and the wholeness and thriving that's found in Shalom. Just talk about that for you, because I think, that's what when I read that chapter, it was like, and this is what I want to experience in those 8 to 15 times a day. This is what I want to experience more and more in my given day. Is like, oh, I'm at home. I'm feeling at peace. Heaven is here, is close. Like, I know what God has done. Like, just, I think it's such like a beautiful visual and experience and encounter feeling for me, the way that you wrote that.
Yeah. I was given such a gift when I became the lead pastor at Discovery Church in 2005. I'd moved from Central Christian Church in Las Vegas. Gene Apple was our lead pastor, and then Judd Wilhite. Yeah. 2 really phenomenal guys. Yep. I was one of the many associate pastors at that church. So Discovery in 2005 was my first lead role. I was 33. And the elders and I basically said to the congregation, and we had the luxury of it being a small portable church, 145 people, including kids. Yeah. Small portable church. What a great gift for a young, anxious pastor. But we basically said to the congregation, look, he's never done this before. Like, Steve's a rookie. And so he's going to need 3 to 5 years to get his mind around. Can we give him that? And I also led that way, because I knew, as an Enneagram 3 who wants to be impressive, this could be death to me, to have to pretend to be an expert in something I'm a rookie in. So we just deflated the pressure. And some of those early relationships are some of our most precious to this day, because the older people in the church took me under their wing. It's also true that I attracted some bullies. Whenever you lead vulnerably, you'll also attract some know-it-alls. Yep. But mostly I attracted caregiving people. I'm on a message. I'll get more directly to your question, but I just do want to say to pastors, your job is not to care for the congregation. That's not your job. Your job is to create a culture where everyone is cared for, including you.
Mm.
And that means you have the freedom to get up in front of your congregation appropriately. You're not vomiting on them
Yeah.
and saying, I'm not well today. Like, I'm operating out of faith today. I'm using your faith today. I did that at Central Christian in Las Vegas. I'll never forget the first time Gene Apple invited me to preach. Steve, I didn't know any better. I come from a tiny church. I didn't run the sermon by him. And I preached a message on doubt,
Oh.
where this is back in the early, right after 9/11. Hey, everyone, I'm still kind of licking my wounds from chaplaincy. Honestly, guys, there's days I'm not sure what I believe. Now, I didn't leave it there. I led us through, what do I do with my doubt? How do I
Yeah.
get out to God? But it was a fairly raw message. Next day, Gene calls me, Steve, let's have a meeting. And that was the first time I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm about to get fired for. And we sit down, and if anyone knows Gene, what's about to happen will make sense, because he has his own journey of brokenness.
Mhm.
And he said to me, that was a real gift. I'd like you to do that again. Like, you help people there. And I brought that into discovery, where I always just felt like my job is to enjoy the Bible in front of people, and be human-sized in front of people. And that gets to home and shalom. It's just so much less pressure than acting like a pastor. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So in the Old Testament, shalom simply at its base level means you are well. And part of shalom that I find fascinating is when I say you're well with your enemies, they're still your enemies, but you don't avoid them or demonize them. In the New Testament, I think the word used is righteousness. I think that's the New Testament version of shalom. I think we've made the grave mistake of limiting it to Jesus' work on the cross. I prefer to say, what if righteousness just means well? And so then that opens up the question, well, where do I find my righteousness? In myself? Okay, now I'm self-righteous. That means I have to depend on myself to be well. I have to please you. I have to rush after that need. I have to make sure you know I'm smart. That's the path to death. Or I can be folded into the righteousness of Christ. And that actually frees me to love irritating people instead of demonize them. When I'm not well, I will have an anger fantasy about them. When I'm well, I'll pray for them and actually legitimately look forward to seeing them in the lobby.
Mm.
And one of those is a path to life and one's a path to death. So home and shalom, like, every one of us need to feel home. And that's that question we started with. Where can I be exactly myself? That's what it means to be home.
That's right.
Where can I be and who can I be myself around? And I just think for leaders, we just need more. Whatever we have now, we just need more of it.
Mm-hmm. Steve Cuss, I'll never forget the first time we met on a bus in Guatemala, and I'm sitting looking out the window on a long drive, and this 6-foot plus Aussie just plops down, and you just start asking me some great questions. And I love how safe you are, how consistent you are, how present you are. You're one of the good ones that I just look up to. And friends, I hope you'll pick up The Expectation Gap. It's an incredible book. I'm telling you, it's not a preaching book, but this is the kind of book that will transform your preaching. It is remarkable. You can't miss it. Obviously, just even hearing Steve's wisdom right now, the book is a great, great read. Where can people find you?
Then just go to stevecusswords.com. We actually have some free courses that they can grab on there if they want. We might have it ready by the time this comes out. We're about to launch an anxiety survey. It's been a little slow because we want the survey itself to give relief. Like, by the time you're done with the survey, you've experienced some relief. So that might be on the site by the time people log on. But they just go to stevecusswords.com. They can grab stuff there.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for who you are and what you represent. And I'm grateful to call you friend and brother.
Me too, Steve. Yeah, I'm a longtime listener. So second-time caller. This is a great treat for me. I love this podcast. So thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, friends, for tuning in to the Crafting Character podcast. Hey, send this to someone that you think might benefit from the wisdom of Steve Cuss. Check out stevecusswords.com. It'll all be in the show notes. But I hope this blesses you today, and may you find more of the moments of home and shalom where you are like right-sized in your humanness, not trying to be self-righteous or self-preserving. Much love, everyone. We'll see you next time. Grace and peace.